The first time the trees shook, it sounded like a train tearing its way through the mountains, though there were no tracks anywhere near the ridge. I was standing on the back porch of my grandmother's cabin, mug warming my palms, watching fog slide between the hemlocks like something alive. The morning had been still enough to hear my own breathing. Then the sound came, deep, rhythmic, and wrong, and the ground gave a small, unmistakable shudder. At first I thought it was wind. That's what you tell yourself in the Blue Ridge when something moves that shouldn't. Wind lives here, after all. It whistles through hollows, howls across balds, knocks dead limbs loose. But this wasn't wind. The air stayed heavy and unmoving, the fog barely disturbed, while the trees themselves began to thrash as if seized by invisible hands. Whole trunks swayed, not bending with the grace of weather, but jerking, snapping back and forth. Leaves flew loose in sudden bursts. Bark cracked. Somewhere downslope, a tree split with a sound like a rifle shot. I felt it in my teeth before I felt it in my feet, a low vibration, like a growl traveling through stone. The mug rattled against the porch rail. My grandmother's old wind chimes clanged in wild, arrhythmic panic. "Lord have mercy," I whispered, though I hadn't prayed in years. The cabin had been empty for months before I came up from Asheville to check on it. Nana used to say the mountains didn't like being left alone too long. She claimed they shifted when no one was watching, rearranged themselves out of spite. I'd laughed when I was younger, city soft and certain the world made sense. Standing there now, watching the forest convulse, her words didn't seem so foolish. The shaking moved like a wave. One stand of trees would explode into motion, then still abruptly, while the next section picked it up, as if something enormous were passing beneath the soil. I stepped off the porch, boots sinking into damp leaves, and nearly lost my balance when the ground lurched again. "Earthquake?" I said aloud, grasping for logic. But earthquakes don't travel uphill like that. They don't pause. They don't feel deliberate. I followed the motion with my eyes, tracking it as it climbed the slope toward the old trail that led to the ridge. My phone buzzed in my pocket, signal flickering to life just long enough for a text to squeeze through from my neighbor down the mountain. "You feel that?" Before I could answer, the trees at the edge of the clearing began to shake harder than any before them. Saplings bent nearly double. An ancient oak twisted, roots lifting clear of the soil, then slammed back down so hard I felt the impact in my chest. Something came up through the leaves, just for a second. I saw the ground swell, bulge, then split. Dark earth fountained into the air. Whatever moved beneath it passed on, leaving only a torn scar of roots and stones behind. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just bolted for the trail, heart hammering, breath tearing in and out of my lungs. The shaking chased me, keeping pace no matter how fast I went. Branches whipped overhead. Cones and clods of dirt rained down. The forest that had always felt like shelter turned suddenly hostile, a collapsing cathedral of wood and shadow. Halfway up the trail, I slipped and went down hard, palms scraping against rock. I tasted blood. When I pushed myself up, the shaking stopped. The silence afterward was worse. No birds. No insects. Even the wind held its breath. The forest stood frozen, trees tilted at odd angles, leaves trembling as if afraid to move. I could hear my own pulse roaring in my ears. Then I felt it, pressure, like being watched from below. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. The ground answered with a slow, grinding roll. Dirt shifted at my feet, not violently this time, but carefully, as if testing my weight. A line traced itself through the soil, circling me, widening. Roots creaked as they were displaced. Stones rose, then sank. A memory surfaced, unbidden, my grandmother sitting by the fire, telling me never to follow the shaking if it came. Never to run uphill. "The old ones wake angry," she'd said, eyes reflecting flame. "They don't like to be seen." What old ones? I'd asked. She'd only shaken her head. Mountain hearts. That's all you need to know. The circle closed. The ground inside it began to rise. I staggered back, screaming now, reason gone. The earth lifted in a dome, splitting with wet, tearing sounds. Something massive pressed upward, not breaking through, just enough to make its presence known. The trees nearest bowed toward it, trunks creaking, leaves shuddering like frightened animals. And then, impossibly, it all sank back down. The forest exhaled. Birds screamed back into being. The wind returned in a rush. The dome collapsed, soil settling as if nothing had happened at all, save for the churned earth and my own shaking body. I stood there for a long time, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. When I finally made it back to the cabin, hours later, Asheville was calling again. Messages stacked up, reports of localized tremors, freak wind events, trees shaking themselves apart, across the mountains. No injuries. No explanations. That night, as I lay awake listening to the forest, I felt it once more, far below, deep in the bones of the land, a slow, restless stirring, like something turning over in its sleep. And I knew the mountains had noticed me. By morning, the scars on the trail were gone, pressed smooth by dew and falling leaves. The news called it a mystery and moved on. I packed my things anyway. As I drove down out of the Asheville Mountains, the trees stood perfectly still, but I swear they leaned just slightly toward the road, listening, waiting for the next time they would be allowed to move.